So welcome to our webinar today. We're going to take a look at the Creo Reverse Engineering Extension. My name is Rob Romanowski. I am the Director of Sales Operations with 3HTI. With me today, leading a brief presentation and demo on the Reverse Engineering Extension is Paul Dye, a Solutions Consultant and Applications Engineer from PTC's Virtual Center of Excellence. And also on the panel is Jeff Gavio, our Director of Marketing. I just want to thank you guys for being on. I want to thank our audience for being here today. And if you can reverse engineer something effectively, it can definitely save you a lot of time and a lot of money. So, Paul, without me talking or monologuing, why don't we just get right into it?
All right, sounds good. And thank you, Rob, for having me on.
Absolutely.
And thank you, everybody else, for jumping on the call as well. So, again, my name is Paul Dye. You may have heard me go through some of these extensions before, but really happy to go through and talk to this one today. Reverse engineering is extremely powerful for a lot of people and something that has a lot of different use cases. And I could definitely talk through some of those and explain kind of how we go about that process here from Creo. So first things first, if you do have any questions throughout, feel free to drop those in the chat. We'll be more than happy to go through and answer anything that you might have. Or if you need to reach out at any point after the fact to get a little bit more information, we're definitely more than happy to assist with that as well. So I'm going to be going through just first and foremost some of the challenges that you probably are looking to address with reverse engineering. I'll go through our solution with that process in the context of Creo, go through the capabilities, walk through demonstration, and wrap up with really some of the benefits that we're going to get from this. So overall, it should take us about just no more than 20 minutes today. All right, so looking first and foremost at the challenges, we need to be able to define and capture our design intent. It might be with a model that you've gone through and sculpted out or done something outside of the context of your CAD environment. It may be a past design that you no longer have a drawing for, you don't have a CAD model associated with it, and you're trying to scan it in, right? And anytime that you're working with scan, point cloud data, or tessellated geometry, you really don't have any of that design intent. All you really have is a bunch of points floating in a coordinate system. But what we need to do is make use of that data. And what we really need to do is be able to drive that geometry using relations, formulas, to anything that we would do from a parametric sense. We really want to have that parametric control over the model. And if you want to make those 3D models out of your data, you need to be able to take it all in, get it into a form that you can really work with. And at the end of the day, for that data to really be useful, it needs to be precise, needs to be mathematically correct geometry, because it's great to be able to look at faceted or tessellated geometry that you oftentimes get with point cloud data, but whenever it comes time to manufacturing models, you need something more than that. You need precise, you need curvature, continuous geometry that you could mill, you could cast, you could 3D print, however you would plan to go through and create that. Now, these are all things that we've seen out in the industry plenty of times and things that we really have a solution for here in Creo with Reverse Engineering Extension. And really, in short, it's our tool for taking that scan point cloud data, editing it, refining it, analyzing it, and at the end of the day, getting real manufacturable geometry that has true design intent behind it. And you'll see this today. There's really 3 main phases of the process. Step 1 would be the point phase, where you're bringing in all the points that you scanned in initially. You're able to go through, sample that data. You can really cut down on the amount of data that your computer has to crunch. So you can get rid of inaccurate data, reduce the number of sample points, and just in general, fixing up any of the areas that maybe weren't scanned in perfectly, which sometimes does happen depending on the scan data that you're working with. But once you have all those data points brought in here, you've imported them, you've eliminated any of that data, what you're going to do is move into the wrapping and faceting phase. This is going to take the point cloud data that you brought in and create a faceted shape almost wrapped around the data. So throughout that, again, removing any of the inaccuracies, filling in any gaps that you might have just to get to a watertight model. So the main point of this is really to get a much clearer view of what this underlying geometry is meant to look like. Helps us to gain a better understanding of the model as we start to move forward into refining the shape of the model. And then what that's going to do is bring us into really the main phase of what we're going to be working with here, which is the surfacing phase. And this is what I'm going to be doing a lot of today. So I'm going to be taking that data and starting to create true Creo surfaces that you can make use of going forward. So what you'll see first and foremost is building out curves on top of the point cloud data, and then defining the areas of the domains that you want to build around. And then from that point, creating and modifying these surfaces from the curves that we built. And once you've built them out, you have different diagnostic tools, different analytics to give you information onto the surfaces that you're creating. You can see how smooth they are, any areas that you might need to clean up, and overall just analyzing to make sure that the curves and the surfaces that we created are working as they should. And one thing that you'll see oftentimes that we're working with here throughout this phase is what we call domains. A domain will essentially be, if I flick back to this, is looking like this. It's a collection of different facet points that you scanned in that are bound by one or multiple curves that you have laid out on that data. Now, these are very useful for creating different surfaces, but also for analyzing the geometry that you're building out. You have lots of different options around it for creating domains, working with them, doing analytics on them as well. And again, really all done to work towards our true 3D geometry at the end of the day. All right, and with that, we can go ahead and take a look at what this actually looks like here from within the context of Creo. So we can walk through these different phases of the process in reverse engineering. We can go ahead and jump right into it here. So for our demonstration of the reverse engineering extension, or REX, as you might call it, it's a little bit shorter, easier to say. We're going to be working with this data set that we have here from one of our customers, Polaris. Now, specifically, what I'm going to be focusing in on here is one of the seat parts. Now, what we're starting with is first and foremost a point cloud that maybe my industrial designer built out. So it could be something that they sculpted out of foam, or really just in general scanned in and constructed elsewhere for the seat cover. This is what we're going to be working with here. So what we want to do is take that data and build our part off of it right here in Creo. So we're going to be taking data points that we have and use them to create the surfaces that we need to construct those surfaces for the seat cover. You can see that we did a similar process here on the bottom and the sides. So now what we're going to do is bring in the point cloud data that we have for the top. Now, whenever you do this, you have multiple different options for bringing that in. It could be different geometry, facets, curves, select what you need there. And then you can see what we have. So once you have those points brought in, you can go through and increase the computation speed by decreasing the number of points that we're using to reconstruct that geometry. So we can lower down the density there. And once you have those points brought in, we're going to look at the facet geometry that we have here. So this is where we can inspect the model, see if we have any gaps or holes. And if we do, very easy to go through, fix those here using that reverse engineering process. And in general, taking whatever steps are necessary here to clean up that geometry, make sure that it matches up well with the point cloud that we started with. All right, so that's really covering most of what we need to do there in the point and facet phases of this. So now what we're going to move on to is really the main process here in the surfacing phase. So I'm going to put the focus back here on our point cloud data that we started with. And we're going to be working here within this Restyle tab. Everything that we're going to do is going to be contained within this one Restyle feature, and we're going to work from there. So looking at this here, it's obviously pretty clear that this is going to be a symmetric part. So what we can do is go ahead and define a symmetric plane that we can mirror about later on. Just allows us to focus over here on the right-hand side of the seat. And we'll start first and foremost with a section curve. That's going to be the base that we'll start to build off of as we keep moving along here. And this is what we're going to be doing over and over in this process, is first and foremost building out the curves, defining the domain of points that we want to work around, and then creating surfaces to outline that geometry that we have from the point data. So this first curve that we go through and work with here is just going to be along that section curve, and it's going to start along the initial surface, but you have many different options here for taking those points, modifying them, making them into whatever shape that you need there. So you're starting with the point cloud, but you're not stuck with it. You can really do whatever you need to from that point, move those points around until you're happy with the result. And we'll finish that up by projecting it onto our center plane, just make sure that we're matching up well there. And we can keep moving on. So once we have that curve built out, I'm going to go through and create a few other curves here in order to lay out a surface. It's just done primarily to outline that underlying geometry, making sure that we're doing our best to align the curves with that geometry. You can really get as detailed or as loose as you'd like in that. It's up to you how precise that you'd like to be in that process. Or later on, we're going to merge these different points together. right? So again, we're going to work around those domain of points there in the middle. And what we'll do is add in selective detail wherever we need it. So you can work with these particular surfaces here and particular curves to lay out those surfaces. We'll go ahead and lay out one more down here through the middle just to give us a little bit more control. And then once you accept those, you can start to see the beginning of our surface once we select on all these different curves. There we go. All right, and if you wanted to add in a little bit more detail, you can go through and break this up into smaller segments just to give it a little bit more control. All right, and you also notice here over on the left-hand side, you have this restyle tree where everything I've done or created up until this point would exist over there. This helps me to keep track of everything, and it's all going to be contained within that one restyle feature. All right, from here, you have lots of options for analyzing the surfaces. So you could look at that within the diagnostic tool. Allows us to see deviations away from the original area and just get a better understanding of which areas that we're pretty close with, any areas that we might be off with, any areas they might be concerned with. You can really see the full effect of any of the changes that you're making there. And in this case, I'm pretty much happy with what we have there. So we're good to move on to the next section. And just like we did on the first surface, we're going to start right along that first section curve that we have going down the middle. Simply lay out some points that are going to follow along that path that we want to go. And once we have that there, again, we'll project that back onto the center plane, make sure that we're aligned there as well. All right, and now we're going to go right along the outside of that section that we're going to place the next surface down. And you can notice while I'm placing these, I'm leaving a little bit of distance between my curve and the outside edge of the geometry. And that's just because I'm going to merge these different sections later on. We're going to round off those areas anyway, so no need for us to go through and align it up perfectly in this case. All right, once we have that outer loop defined, we'll specify our domain of points there in the middle. Again, this is an area that we could go through and work with later on for doing analytics, looking at deviations, or even building surfaces from those domain of points. And before we go through and build our surface, we'll add in one more controlling curve there going down through the middle of that area. And with this laid out, we'll create another surface here. In this case, it's using a net. And that's one thing that you'll notice here too as well, is that there's a lot of different ways for constructing curves in Creo. We're going through and using a few different techniques so you can see what that would look like. You can really set them up all the way that you want, but still have the same ability to go through, modify them, analyze them as you go along. And it's not the typical Creo workflow that you would normally see with the parent-child relationship. It's using that facet geometry to create the domains, the curves, the surfaces, but once they're built, you're really free to work with them however you want. You can change around that geometry without affecting anything else up the line. Right, and what we can do is go through, build out the surfaces, analyze them here like you see, just understand what you have and really work with them regardless of the point data that you started with, but still always have that as a reference for where you came from and use that to build out what you have going forward from here. All right, and just like that, we can move on to a different part of the geometry and create another surface down here. And everything that we're building out here is just going to be managed under this one restyle feature. So you don't have a lot of the hassle of having all these different curves, all these different surfaces in the model tree where it's more difficult to manage and you're running into a risk of having things change unintentionally. Instead, we just have it all managed under that one restyle feature, where you still have the restyle tree where you can jump into, see everything that you've created, but it's a lot more free flowing, just simply using that faceted geometry as a jump off point. And you could work with it and make any modifications as you need to going along. And this one's going to be a little bit more simple of a curve. So in this case, we'll just use those 4 curves to build out the surface. And once we have that surface, we can project it here onto our faceted geometry, just make sure that it's matching up as well as it can. And then we'll keep going on. And as you can see, there's a lot of different ways of building out the different surfaces. Even if you just wanted to do 4 corners, or we just simply make a surface off of the 4 different points in space there, and then we could go through and increase the complexity as we go along here. Again, we'll finish that up by projecting the surface onto our faceted geometry, and we're good to move on. All right, this next area might be a little bit more complex. Maybe you want to have some finer details in there. So we'll put down a few different controlling curves instead of just simply having the four corners like we did on the last one. That's really something that you'll get the hang of once you start doing this, is what type of surfaces work well for the geometry that you oftentimes work with. Maybe it's just one or two different types of surfaces. Maybe it's many types of surfaces, but you have all the different tools here in Creo, right? And once you have that surface, go ahead, take it, analyze it, see if you like it. And if not, go back and make any of the changes that you might want to. In my case, I'm pretty much happy with that. And you can still always go back with any of these and modify anything that you might want to change later on. So if you wanted to extend this one out later, because we know that we're going to merge it in with those other surfaces later on, you could do that. But just in general, very easy to work with these different surfaces as we go along there. And even if there is a surface that we forgot about, so actually in the back here, there might be an area that we forgot to cover, we can go ahead and do that as well. And it could be a very quick process. So you could just follow tight along those edges. You could change them up if you'd like to. There's nothing really telling you you have to match up exactly with that point cloud data, unless you really do want to, in fact, match up as best you can, but you do have control over that process. And what I'm going to do here is take the domain that's contained within these curves here, and instead of how we did it previously, just by building out a surface straight from those curves, what we can instead do is build it from the domain of points itself. So you still have a lot of control and options for controlling that surface, defining the direction. You can look at the dimensions that were created here from that domain, and you can either just keep those, or you can either change them up to whatever you want. Really, it's still completely up to you how you want to work with that. And in this case, I do want to closely follow along that back edge, but instead let's make it a nice, smooth, extended curve here. And just like we were able to do with any of those other surfaces from before, we're still able to take them, work with them as we see fit. If you need to extend them, work with it a little bit, however you need to there, you can definitely do that as well. All right. And that looks good for my back surface. We can go back into my isometric view of this entire part, and let's go ahead and set some of these different layers to change the display and clean up the area that we're working with. So now that we have all the surfaces that we need, we can just go ahead and hide the curves that we added in and work from there. And that's really going back to the point that I mentioned earlier. If you really don't have to work with those curves if you don't want to, it's not the same parent-child relationship. It's all just going to be contained within this one restyle feature. And now that we created all the different surfaces that we need, we can treat them just like standard Creo surfaces that you might be used to. In this case here, we can go ahead and extend these different surfaces past each other. So I'm just going to overlap them. And once we have everything overlapping here, what we'll do is take this and trim down any of the extra that we might need and extend them all to make sure that they're matching up as well as possible. And first we'll do this up here on the top surface here. Just make sure that we're extending and overlapping those top surfaces. And once they've been overlapped, we'll use the merge feature to get rid of any of the excess surface that we had extended over. And to clean it up, you can see we'll go ahead and throw in a round to smooth that joint and transition a little bit. That's one of the nice things to notice with this is once you have that restyle feature, it really just goes back into your standard Creo functionality. You're using your extends, your merges, your rounds, anything that you would normally use for creating or editing surfaces and elsewhere in Creo. Go ahead and do the same thing on the side of the model here. Do pretty much the same type of thing that we did up on the top. And for most of these, we'll just simply extend out a little bit further than we would need to in each direction. And then it's right back into the merging. And once it's all cleaned up, we can clean it up with a few different rounds before moving on. And this is really going to be a lot cleaner than simply trying to work with the rounds that may have been scanned in from before. What we have now is a lot cleaner transitions. They all have parametric control with real dimensions, real design intent behind them. I'll quickly round off that transition in the middle there. And there we have it, something that we could tie in back with the rest of the part. We can go ahead and unhide the other surfaces that we had from before and merge it all back together. And it'll be the same process as we had before, just use the merge to bring it back together. And then the round feature to smooth out the transition between those. There we go. And that looks pretty good. And even if there is a surface that you forgot about from before, like that surface that we have in the back here, it's still just as easy to work with it, just as we have with any of the other surfaces. We'll first and foremost go ahead and mirror that about the center, make sure that we're staying symmetric across that whole part. We'll merge those surfaces back in together and round it off that middle section here as well. And we're good to go. All right, so it really goes to show that even though you started with all these different surfaces in that one restyle feature, you're still able to go through and work with them on an individual level and at any point in the process later on down the road. Go ahead and add in that last round here. And that's looking good. Pretty much do it for bringing in the design. So again, started off with a decent bit of complexity from the point cloud data, but using the restyle and the reverse engineering process makes it very straightforward for taking all those different points, turning them into real curvature continuous surfaces that we have in Creo. So again, not only just work with them in the context of the assembly, but works well out in the real world as well. So these are parts that we can mill, extrude. In this case, it would probably be a cast, but however you want to do it, you're able to take them and create the parts here using that reverse engineering process. All right, so that covers everything that I wanted to show here from within the context of Creo. Again, if you do have any questions, feel free to drop those in, but really want to leave you with some of the real value that this is giving to us. So first and foremost, what you're doing is you're reducing time to market. It's much faster to get from that point cloud data to real manufacturable surfaces that you can get into production. A lot shorter amount of time. You're reducing the product development costs. So taking geometry, and even if it is fairly complex, where in the past it could have been a very painstaking process to try to recreate that geometry, it's a lot more straightforward here using reverse engineering. And at the end of the day, realize price premium. So you don't have to take any shortcuts towards building out the best models possible at the end of the day. All right, and with that, that covers everything that I want to touch on today. And I could pass it over to you, Rob, to wrap up.
Paul, thank you very much. Appreciate it. As always, a good overview and a great demo. So if anybody has any more questions or any specific detail that's necessary and want to see a more in-depth demo regarding the reverse engineering extension or anything regarding Creo or Windchill or augmented reality, you can contact us at info@3hti.com, or you can send us an email at info@3hti.com, or you can reply to the to the invitation that was sent to you regarding this webinar. If you reply to that, they come directly to me. So I don't think we have any questions at this point. So if you do think of anything later, you can feel free to get in touch with us. Next week, we're going to have a webinar on Creo's additive manufacturing extension, which will be very, very interesting regarding not just creating lattice structures, but how to optimize your design, especially if you're using a 3D printer. So that'll be really cool next week. And Paul, I think we have you on for that. We do. So anyway,
Yes.
thanks again for being on. The recording will be sent out either later today or tomorrow. And have a great rest of your week, everybody. Take care.